Hey everybody, Christopher here, your host of Karen Isn't Always Right, with the next installment of our podcast. First off, I just want to give a huge thank you to all of the new followers and listeners to this podcast. It's been kind of a busy week for it, and I just want to thank everybody. This particular episode is very personal to me. I recorded it a while back, and I really don't go back and listen to my recordings. That may be obvious by the production value, but regardless, I can't stand the sound of my own voice. But this episode is about the anxieties that I deal with when interacting with very challenging and difficult guests or customers. And initially, I was very hesitant to release this podcast, because many of us fear judgment of others, and that's kind of what I was dealing with. But at the end of the day, I decided to go ahead and put it out there because I think there's enough people, just in talking to others, that may be able to relate to this. And so, I share that with you. For those who may not be able to, I don't know what to tell you other than maybe it'll provide some insight into what many people deal with on a day-to-day basis when they're, getting yelled and screamed at. So anyway, I urge you to listen to this, and I hope you enjoy it. If you have any feedback, certainly feel free to hit me up on social media or my website. You can directly email me through that. But I do hope you give it a listen, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Sunday morning, although I have no clue what day you're listening to it on, but here I am sitting in my dining room on a Sunday morning drinking my coffee. I'm laid up with this broken ankle, technically broken leg, so my wife went to work out, so I figured I'd record a podcast. So here we are. Funny story, I'd already actually thought I recorded a bunch of this podcast already, and I hadn't hit the record button. So yeah, pretty stupid. So I'm starting over. I'm a little frustrated right now because I was on a roll there. Well, anyway, so today I was going to get kind of personal with everybody and share some stuff about me and how I handle the anxiety of dealing with really, really difficult customers. For those of you who know me really well, you know that I have general anxiety disorder, which, in today's day and age really isn't anything special or different. I think there's a lot of people out there that struggle with this, but we're going to talk about how I deal with it. I think probably a lot of you who do struggle with some semblance of anxiety will be able to relate pretty heavily to this episode. And then those of you who don't, you might sit there thinking, why are you being such a bitch, Fry? For that I tell you, I have no idea. All I know is that it is what I deal with. And if you don't deal with it, I am very envious. Because it's pretty terrible to be in a job, in the job that I have, where my primary function is to interact and engage with customers, and a lot of the time, well, not a lot of the time, but many times it can include upset customers. And so again, if you don't struggle with that, man, I am very, very jealous of you. In fact, there's several GMs in my company that I know that. I see how they are, and I know that it's just not a problem for them. And I gotta tell you, I watch that, and I try to emulate how they are, but it's tough. My brain and emotions just don't want to cooperate sometimes. And so, what do I mean by this? What exactly is it that I struggle with? Well, I guess I'll start with sort of how I feel, in the moment when I either immediately engage with an upset customer or I'm notified of an upset customer. Like, let's say I get a call on the radio if I'm in the office or something like that, and they call me and say, hey, Fry, there's a customer in the lobby that wants to speak to you. And my response is like, did they specifically ask for me? Yeah, they specifically asked for the general manager. And it's like, okay. And then sometimes I'll be at home. It'll be my day off or I'm off work or whatever. And I get either a text, a phone call, or an email notifying me of an issue and just giving me a heads up, which on one hand, I've given my team the directive of like, I would like a breakdown and details if you ever have a customer situation that goes south and could escalate, and I may have to get involved, or corporate, or they're going to send in something to corporate, whether it's a phone call or an email. And I need to be aware of it because I'm going to ultimately have to deal with that. So if it goes directly to corporate, at least in my company, and another one that I've worked for, it automatically will get kicked back to the general manager to deal with, which on one hand I totally get. There's many circumstances which it's fine. It requires the general manager. The general manager is more knowledgeable about whatever that particular issue is. There's a lot of things though that I don't agree with. That I have zero to do with whatever that situation is. That could be pricing, that could be food and beverage selections, that could be, it's just there's a whole host of things that I really have nothing to do with, and yet I have to still answer to these things, and that can be frustrating sometimes. And then there's the other where, if I just happen to be walking through the lobby or down the hallway or something, and then a guest walks up to me and says, "Are you a manager?" And so I'm going to talk about how I feel in those moments, and it's not great. It's let's talk about, like, if I'm at home and I get that email or that text message, "Hey, heads up, we had a situation that you're probably going to hear about." And as soon as I read that, I mean, sometimes before I even read the email, if I see the subject, like, my phone will light up and I look over at it, and the banner on my phone is upset customer, as an example. I mean, immediately I feel a huge spike in anxiety. I mean, immediately. So then I open it, and sometimes it just depends on what the situation is, obviously. I mean, some things are more serious than others. Some I've had tons of experience with, and so I'm pretty confident in, okay, that'll be easy enough to resolve. I mean, I've been doing it a long enough time that I've encountered, you'd like to sit here and think you've encountered just about everything, but a new day, a new issue. I just like the old adage of, it's good to learn something new every day. I'm telling you, man, I would say not a week goes by where I still don't run into new things, or some variation on an old issue. And that's typically what it is. It's just some sort of variation where it's like, it kind of gets me a little bit stuck on how I might approach the issue. And so it could be that's causing me the anxiety of, like, oh shit, I'm not entirely sure how I want to handle that. Or it's the level of intensity to the complaint and how upset this customer might be that will determine kind of my level of anxiety. And then the worst part about that is, depending on when this communication came through, then it's like, okay, how long I have to wait until I actually have to deal with this guest, because with anxiety, for those of you who struggle, you completely understand. Like, I get a lot of anticipatory anxiety, and so what happens is my brain will just sit there and run through every possible scenario of how I might get yelled at, or my brain will automatically go worst case scenario. Like, every time I'll sit there and think about how I might get fired or whatever. Like, I don't want to lose my job. I've lost my job before. Don't really want to do it again. It sucks. And so. But the thing is realistically speaking, it is highly unlikely that I'm ever going to lose my job for some sort of customer service situation, especially if it's just one. If I had a pattern of terrible customer service, especially if it was personally from me, where I was just dealing with things poorly, then obviously there's some cause to maybe make a change. But look, I consider myself pretty good at this stuff. I have a very good team. They're generally pretty good at resolving complaints for the most part. Sometimes there's more work created for me because things aren't handled well. But look, in their defense, I've done that to my boss, where I haven't handled a situation as well as I could have, or at least in the customer's mind. They just weren't happy with me, and they need to continue escalating it up the chain. And so I'm sure my boss has thought that about me. And so sitting at home thinking about all this kind of stuff really sucks, especially if you have an entire day before you go back to work, before I go back to work and finally deal with it. And then it's the manner of, how am I going to engage with that guest when
when I have to resolve the situation. And I got to tell you, email I'm generally okay with, because I'll have plenty of time to formulate my thoughts. I can review what I've written. I can talk to other people and get their thoughts on how I'm going to approach it. I could even talk to my boss about how I'm going to approach it, and I could do some of that stuff. If it was a phone call, I can do some of that stuff prior, obviously. But like as I'm typing an email, if I'm in the moment or whatever, I can still get advice. Okay. Now look, I feel like I'm relatively articulate. I feel like I'm relatively intelligent. I'm able to handle a lot of things. But when it's a phone call, that's when things get tricky for me, because again, my anxiety really like gets in the way of things sometimes. And I spoke about how I really feel internally, and that's I will literally feel like drained of energy. I'll get cotton mouth. I'll get jittery. My palms will be sweating. I mean, it sounds really unhealthy as I say it out loud. So if I've got to make that phone call, that's how I feel. And then if I have to call them, like I really dread phone calls. I really dread the prospect of getting yelled and screamed at over the phone. I worry about myself and how I'm going to conduct myself, if I'm going to be too anxious, because as I start conversations, like especially within the first couple minutes until we settle into the call, I know my voice is shaky, and then I get kind of embarrassed. I internalize this, and I worry about, okay, they can hear that, they perceive that I'm anxious, or they may not even perceive it as anxiety. They might just perceive it as whatever. I don't even know, something other than me trying to resolve their problem. It could come off as apathy, or I don't even know. I'd love to go back and ask customers sometimes, hey, how did I take care of that? I mean, sometimes obviously at the end of the call or the situation or whatever, if you've resolved it, and so clearly they're happy with it. But so anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought. So that's kind of how I feel if it's a situation like an email or a phone call or something like that I've had to sit there and wait around thinking about how I'm going to deal with it. And then there's the situations where I'm at work. I might be in the office and I get that call to come out to the lobby. And so then I got to spend that entire walk down to the lobby or out into the hallway or whatever to go talk to this guest. And look, if they've asked for the general manager, I feel like shit's about to get real, because clearly in their mind, no one other than me is going to be able to handle their frustration. They're at their max for the frustration, or at least close to it. I mean, I guess they could have not said anything and immediately gone to corporate. But as I said, if they go to corporate, it'll just get kicked right back to me, which a lot of people don't know. And I have had to tell people that sometimes. It's like, look, I mean, you can write corporate, but it is going to come right back to me, and we'll be talking again. Then they just want my boss's information, and I hate doing that because I really don't want to put something back in my boss's lap. I've had managers in the past who have been okay with doing that to me, where they just come to me and say, hey, you're going to be dealing with a guest situation. Sorry, tried to handle it, but, good luck. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the general attitude that people can have about it. So, that walk down to the lobby, again, I'm processing all the different ways that this could probably go wrong. And again, even though I know, realistically speaking, it shouldn't go wrong, I should be able to do my job well. I should be able to de-escalate the situation, mitigate whatever their frustrations are. But, my brain doesn't like to cooperate with me. So, as I get down there, again, I'm feeling shaky, mostly, and short of breath. That's how I feel as I'm approaching the guest. But what I'm trying to project on the outside is, a friendly demeanor, an approachable demeanor. I put on a smile, not like a Joker smile, hey, a little crazy. I certainly don't want to come off like that, but I do sometimes have to force a smile. Sometimes I do have some sense of the situation. I do try to add, like my whole management team, if an employee calls for a manager saying a guest wants to talk to him, we try to get some heads up as to like, hey, can we have some insight into what the concern is. So that helps a little bit, because I kind of, more information is better. And so, as I approach the guests, I put on that smile, and then when I get to them, hey, my name is Christopher. I'm the general manager. I understand you wanted to speak to me. How can I help you? I try to be very friendly. Now, just now, in this situation, it's very easy for me to do that without any problem. When I'm talking to them, as I mentioned earlier, if I was making a phone call, I get shaky voice. It gets trembly, and I cannot control it. I do everything possible. I'm telling you guys, like, I go to therapy. I've tried to hypnotize this shit out of me. I meditate constantly. I do breathing exercises. I mean, I'm doing everything. And look, a lot of it has been helping, and I've really amped this kind of stuff up over the last year and a half or so. It actually used to come out instead of in the form of anxiety. It used to come out in the form of a temper. I used to get really, really angry. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to minimize my temper, but unfortunately, then it ends up projecting in the form of anxiety. So I've introduced myself to the guest, and hopefully they didn't feel like they didn't feel my palm all sweaty or anything like that, because that's just embarrassing, But as I'm talking to them again, I'm sure that they can detect this trembling voice and this shortness of breath, things like that. But I do my best to put on the best front and to stay calm, to continue to smile, to make eye contact, not to, all those things in body language that suggests that you're listening, that you're not being aggressive in any form or fashion, things like that. And that can be very, very difficult when the guest themselves is aggressive. And I will tell you that I don't handle that internally very well. As soon as, this always can go one of two ways. Either they introduce themselves, in a calm manner. They're obviously frustrated, but if they're just like, oh, thank you for coming out and talking to me. I really want to make you aware of this situation. That's obviously a very positive way of moving forward. But then the guest that jumps your ass immediately, then you get into that fight or flight mode, and we'll get to that in a second. But I'm going to tell you a story. I used to work out, in this theater in California, and I've mentioned that before, where the guests out there, they have a lot of money, and I found that whenever I work at theaters in areas that have a lot of money, those typically tend to be the harder guests, the most challenging guests to deal with. The area I'm in now, socioeconomically, is kind of maybe middle to slightly upper middle class, but this area in California was upper class for sure. And whenever they asked for the general manager and I came out, they always would introduce themselves as like, I'm Dr. So-and-so, or I'm Bob and I'm the CEO of this company, or whatever. And, in my mind, and at the time, I think I was like, I want to say I was 23, so I was pretty young, and I looked very young. I probably looked 17, 18 years old, which in their minds, they just see me as a kid, and so they immediately see themselves as superior, and they can be very, very condescending. And that kind of shit drives me crazy. I do not get that kind of stuff where I'm out here. But so again, if the conversation turns towards very aggressive, they start jumping my ass right away, I get that fight or flight mode. And I'm kind of already in it anyway because I'm anxious about the situation. But if it's fight or flight, man, like, I am feeling defensive. And if they start attacking me personally, that's where it can really go off the rails for me. Now, I could probably count on one hand how many times I have handled a customer situation in the moment very, very poorly, to the point where I'm honestly embarrassed about it. But we're going to talk about it anyway. So I have one example in particular this was from shortly after my theater opened. So it was about 4.5 years ago. And we had a really, really stressful opening. This is the first restaurant concept theater that I had opened. There was a lot of things going on. Things hadn't been going very well. We had a lot of turnover. We had done, I may have talked about this before, but we had done a lot of what we call warm body hiring because we had to hire a lot of people. We hired about 150 employees for this theater. It's a 9-screen theater, so that's a lot. And when you try to hire so many people with little regard for their potential or their experience or anything like that, that can create a lot of problems. But we were running out of time, and we just needed bodies. in retrospect, it almost would have been better to have just had less people, but better trained, better attitudes. Look, I try to do my best, not to get too far off track, but I try to do my best to hire for attitude. In a movie theater, skill and experience isn't as important at the employee level. Sometimes I'd much prefer to have somebody who's never had a job before, and then I can train them well if they've got the right attitude. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. We'd had a lot of turnover. It was a very stressful situation. A lot of things going wrong. And so I say that to say this. So this one particular day, I was walking down the hall, and this guy comes out of his auditorium and immediately jumps my ass. "Are you a manager?" And so I'm like, "Oh, fuck. Yes, sir. How can I help you?" And then he proceeds to lay into me about his bacon cheese fries. It's this kind of shit that makes me wonder about people's priorities in life, but I digress. So he's going off on me about his bacon cheese fries. I think they were, if I recall, I believe that they were cold. And then I guess he wanted them remade, and they brought them back to him, and they were cold again, and they had been taking too long. Now, look, you're going to learn as you listen to my podcast. I have a terrible memory. I have the memory of a goldfish. So I just apologize up front. I just struggle with the details sometimes, especially if some time has gone by. So, but I believe that was kind of the situation that we were in. So he's really laying into me, and it gets to a point where I'm trying to apologize. I'm trying to, figure out some solutions and things like that. And he's just not having any of it. And then he just starts laying into me about me, and he starts yelling at me about, he starts calling me this, I'm a terrible, like I'm a horrible manager, and I should get fired and stuff like that. Now, bear in mind, I've been talking to this guy for like a minute tops. He doesn't know me. I don't know him. So I don't know where he's thinking that I should be fired, and I'm this terrible manager. Now, what happens next? He may have been right, but he won't let up, and I'm trying to listen. I was letting him get it out of his system, and then I'm trying to help, and it's not going anywhere. And this is where I made a decision that here we are years later. I regret, because I've never done this before, but he was not letting up at all, and so it just got to the point where I about faced and walked off. And like I said, I'm pretty embarrassed. I've never done that before, would never do it again. I would never be okay with any of my people doing it. in that moment, I didn't know what else to do, because nothing else was working. That's just what I did. And so I just walked away from the guy, because he just wasn't listening. So walk away from the guy. I saw him go into his auditorium. We're standing right outside his auditorium. I see him go back into his auditorium. I go to the office. I'm very, very amped, like very amped. And if I recall, I think there's a couple managers in the office at the moment, and I was telling them what was going on, and I even told them what I did, which is just an absolutely terrible example to set for the managers. So I sat there for a minute, and I tried to breathe through it, and I was trying to calm down. And then I got very, very embarrassed of myself, because A, it was just a terrible example to set for my team, and B, regardless of how that guy was talking to me, look, I've got to be a better manager than that. I've got to be a better person than that, and I've got to figure out how to resolve it. And I just shouldn't have done that. So, at minimum, I could have said, let me get you somebody else that can maybe help you better than I can, because we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I don't know if that would have helped, but it's something better than walking away from the guy. So at this point, I decide, you know what, I'm at least going to get the guy some passes to try to make up for this. And here's the other thing. If I recall, the guy was also upset because he was missing his movie. And I guess in my mind, I'm like, well, if you're so upset about missing your movie, what are we doing standing out in the hallway with you screaming at me? Let me just remake your bacon cheese fries. We'll get them to you hot. But that's not what we did. So I grabbed some passes, and I went into the auditorium, and I found him. He was like pretty much right when I walked in. He was sitting right there, and I went up, crouched next to his seat, and I handed him the passes, and I said, "Hey, look, man," I said, I want to apologize. I handled that really, really poorly, and I feel terrible. I at least want to give you these passes and just see if there's anything else I can do for you." And his response was, "You're making me miss my movie right now." And he said it pretty much just like that, deadpan. That was it. He didn't seem angry. He was just like, basically, leave me the fuck alone. To which internally, that really, really pissed me off. I looked up at the screen. The house lights were still at half there, and it was actually, I don't even know. I think the trailers were literally starting. That's what had happened. And so the movie, we were not in the feature yet. Literally, the trailers were just starting. So he really wasn't missing anything. I think he was just so angry at me. He wanted nothing to do with me. He wanted me to get the hell out of his face. And it's like, bro, I'm trying to help you here. So then, I walk away from that situation. I'm still anxious because I've just handled this just terribly. And so now I'm very concerned that he's gonna go to my supervisor about it. Ultimately, he never did, which I guess is good. I don't know if he's come back as a guest anymore. For all I know, he has, and we've crossed paths again, and we've both forgotten about it. I obviously haven't forgotten about the situation. I know if I had been in his shoes, I would have been really mad if a manager walked away from me. This is just unacceptable. However, I would like to think that if it wasn't going well, if I'm him and he's me, if it wasn't going well, I would have maybe asked for a different manager, or I would have just been like, all right, whatever, and walked away, and then probably written a letter. Maybe I'm not a letter writer typically, but I feel like I would have handled it differently. But I don't know. It's easy to say after the fact, but so that's a situation that I handled terribly, and it was because I really let my anxiety get in the way, which is not a good excuse at all. And I honestly, I get very embarrassed, and there's a little self-hate that goes on when I do that, and I allow that to happen, which is really why I have chosen to see a therapist, why the therapy helps, I realize this is super personal shit, but whatever, we're all friends here. So the therapy helps. Essentially, it allows for me to basically just sort of vent about whatever may be going on. I will say that about 75% of the shit I talk about in therapy is work related, with about half of it being customer related issues and the other half being kind of human resources issues, which I could have a whole other podcast about that, and may eventually. And so, at minimum, it allows me to just kind of bounce all this shit off my therapist. She can give kind of some perspective that other people may not give. Obviously I share this stuff with my wife pretty frequently, but look, she's my wife, not my therapist. I'm sure she probably gets tired of hearing about this kind of stuff. Although she used to work in movie theaters, and she knows exactly what it's like. But sometimes I just need that, sort of a third party, uninvolved perspective. So, and then it got to a point where, while therapy can be helpful, it's not really resolving my issue completely. And I was getting to my wit's end this year, actually. And it's not all customer related. A lot of it can be just people in general related. It's a new world, and there's just a lot of HR stuff. And so it was really wearing on me a lot. Really, I say this year, really in 2019. To the point where I was like willing to try anything. And so I'd been talking to Ashley, it's my wife, been talking to Ashley a lot about it. I was like, look, man, I'm fucking willing to be hypnotized. Like, if you've seen Office Space, I almost kind of wanted it like that. Can you just like snap your fingers and make it seem like I've been fishing or something like that? And I realized that's not exactly how it works, but I'm just willing to try anything. And so we researched it and found a hypnotherapist. And so I've seen her for I think it's been 4 or 5 sessions now. And really, it's more. It's not like they swing a pocket watch in front of you you're getting sleepy. It's more of a guided meditation kind of thing. And it actually does seem to be helping. So between regular therapy, hypnotherapy, I've been meditating on my own a lot. I use an app called Headspace. It has a lot of guided meditation in there. Meditation's fucking hard for those of you who haven't tried it. Like, just try, if you're not a meditator, try sitting in a quiet room by yourself, even for just 5 minutes, and try thinking about nothing and see how that goes for you. It's very, very difficult. At least it's difficult for me. So I've been doing a lot of meditation. I do a lot of breathing exercises as well. And all of this is in an effort to, again, to kind of mitigate this anxiety that I deal with. Because I'm just telling you, man, it's pretty terrible. So, and so that's kind of where I am internally when I'm dealing with these upset guests. I think the third thing was if I'm on the floor and I happen to be walking by someone who's really upset and they immediately, kind of like the guy in the hallway, I don't have time to immediately to have that anticipatory anxiety. I'm just thrown into that situation. But I still get that like amped up feeling. And so like for me, it's like this hybrid of anxiety and anger. Especially if I feel like I'm being personally attacked. And the crazy thing is, man, like I train my people. It's hard because it's almost like a do what I say, not as I do kind of situation here. But I train my people. Look, do not take it personally. Their anger is never really about you. It's just the situation, and it's how the situation was handled or whatever. Now you can determine how it gets resolved, but they're not angry at you. They're just mad at the situation or frustrated with the situation. Now, I have trained thousands and thousands and thousands of people in my career on this subject. Now, I'm very good at training on this subject, and I've had a lot of very positive results, and I've turned out a lot of very good employees and managers. They're excellent in dealing with guest service. That being said, I struggle with it personally. So even though I know they're not attacking me personally, they're not angry at me personally, at least yet, I get angry when they're yelling at me. And so it's again, it's this hybrid of anger and anxiety, and it's super difficult to minimize in the moment. And so one of the other things I kind of wanted to talk about was, okay, so when I'm in that mode, how do I stay pleasant with a guest? Now, I gave you that example a minute ago. That was one of the worst examples that anybody could ever give. I mean, I say one at worst. It's everything's relative, I suppose. You all probably know people out there who've handled things way worse than I just did. But and I mean, I've seen it. I've heard about it. I've seen some pretty terrible situations. And now, in the scheme of things, that guy, it wasn't horror. I mean, it was rough in the moment. In retrospect, as I look back on it, I certainly handled worse. But it was just one of those examples that immediately popped into my head, especially because I just handled it so poorly. And I think the reason I handled it so poorly, not to get too far off track again, but I think the reason I handled it so poorly in the moment was because my stress level was already super elevated. One of the things I've actually talked about with my therapist is she's identified this thing with me where if you imagine a glass, and if the water is my anxiety, what'll happen is, like, if you picture my anxiety is where the water is pretty much maybe half an inch from the top of the glass, and then so it doesn't take much to put, like, that's my baseline. So then it doesn't really take much to push the water out of the glass and overflow my anxiety. Whereas, like, so my goal needs to be to lower my anxiety level to like the middle of the glass, so that when something happens, it just elevates it a little bit, but I'm not overflowing and I can still handle things. And I think that's been a lot of my problem over the years, is that I'm just always running at this super high baseline. And so I can't intake much more, which is not great, especially, again, considering the job that I have. So I was going to talk about how am I able to still stay pleasant with guests. Oh, sorry. To finish my other thought, I just think it was a heightened situation. We had just opened this theater. We were having lots and lots of problems. So my anxiety level was already at its peak. And so I just did a shitty job. It is what it is. I try to own it. I feel bad about it, and I try not to do it again. So how do I stay pleasant, or how do I try to resolve these issues even when I am feeling like this? Now, if it's in person, I try to keep that smile on my face. Again, even if they're yelling at me, and I try to be mindful about. I don't want the smile while they're yelling at me to be perceived as I don't know, I guess condescending, or like even that I'm laughing at them, because that's obviously the worst thing. Is I don't want anybody to think I'm laughing at them. Although sometimes I will say, when you're seeing somebody lose their shit over something really stupid and they're yelling and screaming and stuff like that, it's hard not to want to laugh at them. I can tell you it would certainly do away with my anxiety if I could, but I don't think that would go well. So I try to keep that smile on my face. I try to breathe as I'm talking to them, so I make a conscious effort to control my breathing. I also do this little trick where I take my thumb and my middle finger, and I'll run my thumb in circles over the pad of my middle finger while it's down at my side, so they're obviously not seeing it. That's just a trick that was taught to me that can help lower your anxiety and your fight or flight mode. And so I'll do those kinds of things, and then I just really make a concerted effort to genuinely listen to what's going on. And I try to push all that other bullshit out of my system, or at least push it down as they're going on. And then, when I say genuinely listen, so I'm actively listening to them. And so whatever they're saying to me, I try, I nod in the right places. I understand. I'll repeat things back. So as I understand it, this is what you're frustrated about, and things like that, so that they know I really am truly listening to whatever their situation is and whatever their frustration is. And as I've talked about in previous episodes, if you've listened to the episode with my son, he and I talked about the acronym LEAST. So listen, empathize, apologize, solve, and thank. And that was something that was taught to me at a different company I'd worked for, which I think is a great tool. I mean, look, there's tons and tons of tools out there, and we're going to cover a lot of these things as we go on. But that's one of the ones that I frequently use, because I just think it really does touch on each thing that you need to be doing. And I think one of the really important things is to also genuinely empathize. Now, you probably see this all the time, where people, in customer service, yes, I completely understand your frustration. That you want to make sure it doesn't come off false and disingenuous, because then that'll just further to anger the customer. And so I really do try. I'm a genuinely empathetic person anyway, almost to a fault sometimes. And so, but I try to genuinely empathize with whatever this person is really upset about. And so I literally try to imagine like whatever their situation is and put myself in that situation so I can truly understand what it is. That can be really difficult sometimes, because I think all of us can agree that there's some dumbass things to complain about. It's funny because I'll go get my hair cut or something like that. And they always ask, like, what do you do for a living? So I'll tell them what I do, and they're like, oh, that must be a great job. And it's like, yeah, most of the time it's pretty good. I said, you get tough customers sometimes, so you get a lot of complaints and stuff like that. And just to be clear, I don't get a lot of complaints at my work. It's not like we have this terrible operation. I think we have a pretty good operation. I think it's just the nature of seeing as many people as we do come through the doors. But anyway, they will always ask, well, what on earth do people have to complain about when going to see a movie? And it's like, well, that's what I think too, but you'd be surprised. And so again, I think we can all agree that there's just a lot of really dumb complaints out there. And so sometimes it can be genuinely difficult to empathize with what they're yelling at you about. But if you really can, I think that it does soften their frustration a little bit, and it will kind of bring them down just a little bit. And sometimes that's all you have to do, is if you can just get them to just calm down just a little bit, just bring that down just a little bit. I try to maintain a really even voice, if I can at least get myself out of that trembly, shaky voice syndrome that I seem to have. But if I can, if I try to use a very calm voice, I try to smile, I understand. That literally has happened to me not that long ago. Things like that. My hope is a lot of the times my initial approach and introduction sometimes can do that too. If I try, because I've known managers who, when they come up, what can I do for you? If they have that kind of approach, well, then the customer is going to immediately sense their defensiveness, and that's not going to help at all. And so, when I come up and I say, hey, how are you? My name's Christopher. I'm the general manager. I understand that there's something you wanted to talk to me about. How can I help? When you present yourself in that way, that can soften things a little bit, and that can help the situation. Not always, but it can help. So if I can get them to just calm down just a little bit, that can really, really go a long way. Now, the problem is when those people don't calm down at all, and in fact, if it goes the other way and they continue to get even more riled up, because then you're forced into a situation where you have to say something to the effect of, hey, I understand your frustration, but I really want to help you, but I'm going to need you to calm down a little bit, or I'm going to need you to lower your voice a little bit. Can we step over here? If I would appreciate if you'd stop swearing at me. And that's a tough thing too, because there's that line between someone who's yelling at you and swearing at you, or yelling and swearing, and so for me, it's like, look, it depends on how bad it gets, but I would generally avoid kicking someone out of the theater for yelling or swearing at me. However, I train my people that they don't have to tolerate that, but there is that line, and they have to be able to identify the difference between them being attacked and the customer just venting off anger. But I do tell it, like, look, you need to give that kind of warning of like, look, I'm here to help, but we're gonna need to calm things down a little bit. So let's lower our voice. Maybe we could step over here away from everybody. Maybe let's not use foul language. Things like that. So if we can get them to stop doing that, that's a tough balancing act though, because you got to be really careful about how you phrase that and how you approach that, because sometimes that could just piss someone off even more. And they don't fucking tell me don't tell me to calm down. You ever been in an argument with like your significant other? Calm down. That always goes well, right? Calm down. Don't fucking tell me to calm down. I'll tell you to calm down. Yeah, doesn't go well. So you got to be really careful about, if it's bad enough when you're with your significant other and you tell them that. So you just got to be really careful with a customer. So you got to give them that opportunity to sort of de-escalate, calm things down a little bit, and then if you can do that, then I think you're in a good place to where you can kind of keep things calm and start actually resolving the problem. So I've actually had situations that have gone really, really bad. Like I've done a really terrible job on the front end, and thought, oh shit, I just created a bigger issue here. But then I've been able to like turn it around. And sometimes that's like the best feeling in the world, when you fucked up, but you're able to really fix it. This used to happen more when I was younger. Again, because I have a stupid temper, and I was just not great at customer service when I was really young. But I was good at fixing it if I screwed up. So like this guy, that's kind of what I tried to do with this guy in the hallway with his bacon cheese fries. Walking away from it, like if I'd gone back and tried to fix it, I've been able to do that kind of stuff in the past, and it really did resolve the issue, and actually they appreciated it even more. And that's not the best example, because I've just never done that outside of that one time. But I've had situations that I just wasn't able to fix in the moment, and they just got even more frustrated. But then I was able to like intercept them after their movie gets out and say, hey, do you mind if I chat with you again real quick? I just really want to apologize to you about how that situation went down. Like, I own that. I take full responsibility for how all that went down. I feel terrible about how it happened. I just want to try to make that up to you. And sometimes people have a huge appreciation for someone who can humble themselves and take ownership for something, and it actually turns that into a much better situation. And I think that's really with any customer service situation that goes bad. If you can, as long as you can try to turn it around, sometimes it makes for an even better experience for them, because they see that it's a company that and individuals who work for the company that really are willing to resolve issues. And so, obviously people don't go into a movie or the grocery store or Old Navy, whatever it is, thinking that they're going to have problems. And if they do go and they don't have any problems, then it could have been just sort of a mediocre experience. Nothing bad, nothing great. It was just whatever. They went and saw their movie over, they went home. It was just average. But if they went in and then things go off the rails a little bit, and then a manager is able to resolve that and fix that and get things back on track, well, then it's like a memorable experience. I mean, you don't want things to go wrong to begin with, but if they do and you're able to fix them, people actually remember that. It becomes this memorable experience, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this company is great because here's what happened, and then they were able to fix it, And look, not all customer complaints are because of something that the theater did or the restaurant did or whatever. It's not all directly related to the business. Sometimes it's another customer. Sometimes shit just goes wrong. Sometimes the customer makes the mistake. And we've had customers who will openly admit, hey, I fucked up. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, and they're willing to admit their mistake, and then we'll fix it for them. And people have a huge appreciation for that too, if you're willing to fix a situation even though they made the mistake, and that goes a long way for people. So and the last thing I kind of want to talk about was what I do after I have an extremely tough situation. I go cry in a corner is really what I do. Now, I have a friend actually that he runs a theater in Texas, and he has dedicated cry rooms, or at least he jokes about it. Like, he showed me a sign one time that he printed, and it said, "Cry room, please limit your time to 10 minutes," or whatever. And I'd gone down to help him open his theater a while back, and the theater's still under construction, but he was giving me a tour, and he was like, so this is a dedicated cry room here, here's a dedicated cry room. So it's just kind of a running joke. I have cried before. I'll admit it. I'm a man. I can admit that. I don't do that often. But what I will do is sometimes I'll vent, to managers. I'm kind of okay with that to a degree. I think there needs to be a limit on, how much you're going to vent, because, it can only be so productive. I also don't want to sit and disparage customers, even if they've done dumb things, because I think we can all agree. I mean, the title of this whole podcast is Karen Isn't Always Right. They're not always right. And so they think they are, but we all know that they're not. And so I'm, to a degree, I'm fine with venting a little bit just to get it out of your system, and for others to maybe commiserate a little bit. And sometimes it can be helpful to identify like maybe what could have been done differently or anything like that. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll do a lap around the building. I'll walk around the building or something like that, just to kind of calm down and breathe. So those are some things that'll help me out. Maybe I'll sit at my desk and I'll just kind of breathe through it. And then sometimes what I'll do is if I immerse myself in other responsibilities, so maybe I'll just go help clean a theater, sweep the lobby, or whatever, something mindless that like just keeps me active and keeps me busy, so that I can just forget about what it is that I had to deal with. Sometimes I'll call my boss about it. So if I had a particularly difficult situation, sometimes I want to run it by him just to he's kind of a friend of mine too. I've known him for a really, really long time now. He was my general manager a long time ago, actually, and now he's my regional supervisor. And he's a pretty understanding guy. He's one of those people I really envy, this ability that he has to always stay calm. Always stay calm. I don't know how he does it. It's pretty amazing. And so sometimes I'll try to run those things by him. Sometimes so I can get maybe some feedback or advice on maybe what I could have done differently. Sometimes it's to get validation for what I've already done. Sometimes it's to give him a heads up to be like, I don't know if I handled that right, and you might be getting a phone call or an email or whatever. And that does happen from time to time where I can't resolve the situation. And I'll share, I'll share more of those down the road. So anyway, so obviously a very personal episode for me. Don't judge me too much. Hopefully nobody thinks I'm a bitching out or anything like that. But my hope really is that there's some of you out there that can really relate to some of this stuff and know that that you're not alone if you do struggle with the anxiety of having to deal with super difficult guests. So hope it was helpful, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. That's the podcast, folks. Please visit kiarpodcast.com. That's KIAR podcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. New episodes are going to be posted weekly on kiarpodcast.com, Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. The views and opinions on this podcast are solely that of the guests and hosts and are not representative of any other organizations or individuals. If you or someone you know are interested in being a guest on Karen Isn't Always Right, please give us a visit at kiarpodcast.com and submit your interest on the Contact Us page, as we'd love to have you. Thanks for joining us on Karen Isn't Always Right, and we'll see you next time.